Hey everyone out there, this is Travis from MMA Scraps Radio, here to do the very first podcast for MMA Scraps Radio. This is something we're going to do in between the weeks of the show, just in case information comes out during the week, as it always does. News that popped right before we did the show last week: Chael Sonnen popped for performance-enhancing drugs. It turns out, as of just a couple hours ago, according to Josh Gross from SportsIllustrated.com, apparently Chael knew it and knew that he might get popped for it. So it doesn't appear like there's going to be any kind of denial really from Chael Sonnen, and really you have to be either really arrogant, ignorant, or just plain ridiculous, because you know you're going to get tested for drugs on a title fight, and randomly, generally speaking, but for a title fight every single time. So it's a little bit unusual that Chael would take such a big risk, because what if he did win that fight? He would be stripped of the title. Well, where's the honor in that? So, Chael, I really hope that there's something else out there that we just don't know yet. But it doesn't look like the evidence is adding up in your favor at this point. So we'll find out more as the story develops during the week. Also, this past week on MMA Scraps Radio, we had a lot of guests, just an incredible amount of guests. Ben Saunders, as you might know, was let go from the UFC just a couple of weeks ago, looking for a fight. We had him on kind of last second. Right after he was on, as he was calling out Paul Daly. He wants to fight at Shark Fights with Paul Daly. Ben Saunders then talked about wanting to fight anywhere where there's top competition, which is great. He's got the warrior spirit. He doesn't really care where he fights. He just wants to fight for an organization that's going to give him the respect that he deserves. MFC president Mark Pavlich joined us later on in the show, and actually, after a little bit of badgering from myself and my co-host Gerald Harris, offered a fight for Ben Saunders against Ryan Ford. Great fighter in the MFC, and that would be a really fantastic fight. After the show was over, I received a message from the president of Shark Fights, and it sounds like the Paul Daly fight may actually happen. So it really kind of depends on what Ben wants to do. Hopefully we'll hear more this coming week or so, and maybe Ben has a couple fights. Who knows? We definitely wish the best for Ben Saunders. In other news, I recently came across some information about the way that the UFC compensates its fighters. I know for the longest time, the UFC caught a lot of flack for not properly paying their fighters. And, it's funny because over the last couple of years, they've always increased how much they pay their fighters. And much like a lot of other sports, if you're not at the top grade, you're not going to get paid as much. But the reality is the UFC does compensate fighters very well. I came across a fighter who got a check many weeks after his fight, and just because it was a good fight, it wasn't fight of the night or anything like that, and received a check that was almost 8 or 9 times what he was paid initially, just because he did a good fight. And it's one of those things where a lot of people don't realize these things. These are the locker room bonuses, as they call them. Even though it's not in the locker room and it's many weeks after, the UFC does compensate and take care of their fighters quite well. On the other hand, if you don't do what you're supposed to do and march by the beat of the UFC drum, you could be in for a little bit of hurting. That's what happened to Todd Duffy, as he got cut a couple weeks ago. It wasn't so much because of his last loss. It was a lot of things going on. There's an excellent article by Josh Gross on SportsIllustrated.com that tells you everything. And I can tell you, Todd Duffy didn't get cut because of his last loss. It was because of some of the other things going on. Efrain Escudero just got cut. Information just came out a couple minutes ago. And I can say the same thing for him. The UFC a lot of times uses these losses as an excuse to be able to get rid of the different fighters. And I think that was the case here with Efrain. Some things happened behind the scenes, I believe. And it's just another unfortunate loss. However, Efrain, I believe, will be able to make his way back. He will get some wins outside the organization. I expect to see him back pretty quickly. So for MMA Scraps Radio, of course, check us out every single week at MMAScrapsRadio.com and MMAScraps.com for some of your best MMA videos. I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. This is for the UG. What's up, UG? And we'll see you next week. Peace.